Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and the winner for the poll for today's video was about the government trying to reduce workers' rights still further, with Brexit being seen for them as an opportunity to do that. Because as soon as Brexit became a real possibility, many MPs, Conservative MPs specifically, have been talking about removing what few employment rights people in the UK have. Because despite what some hardline Brexiteers would say about Brussels deciding our laws, it's not actually as they describe it, because the UK has the weakest employment rights in the EU and one of the worst in the developed world. Of course, nearly the worst isn't good enough for the Conservatives, who believe that every employment law is a nail in the coffin of competitiveness. But the thing is, there are countries with better employment rights than us that also do better than us. They have stronger economies than us. And what they fail to notice is that actually happy workers with loyal employers are more motivated and more productive. Now, as soon as the referendum result came in, it didn't take Theresa May long to talk about throwing the European Union Convention on Human Rights onto the fire, a series of laws that actually the UK came up with in the wake of the Second World War. And yet, 3 generations later, somehow, it's the UK that actually resents them. Or rather, the party that finds itself in power most of the time. I somehow doubt that the actual people of the United Kingdom want their rights eroding, even though many of them have voted for just that. And when it came to the Chequers meeting of Cabinet to discuss the withdrawal agreement, ahead of putting it to Parliament, several ministers were dismayed about the backstop arrangements. Now, I know what a lot of people say is, the people who actually want us to exit, and particularly want us to exit with no deal, it's because, they don't want to follow the tax avoidance laws and it's all about generating their own wealth. There is a lot of that as well. But there's also plenty of people who want a complete break from the EU for purely ideological purposes. There were notes photographed indicating disapproval that we'd be locked into specifically human rights laws. That's what they object to. We've already seen the latest government disregard for worker rights with the massive expansion of 0 hours contracts, something which not only locks many people into an exclusive contract with their employer, but for that employer to not even have to reciprocate by committing to guaranteed hours. And to cap it all, the government then counts these people who are earning no wages as being in employment, so they get to fiddle the employment figures as well as try to make the case that unemployment is going down when the reverse is happening. That's to say nothing of the awful way in which they have illegally denied people benefits to get them off the figures. But quite frankly, 0 hours contracts and benefit sanctions is something I could do videos on just in their own. Now, there was a Business Insider report from 2017 that showed that in the government's haste to try and show that unemployment is coming down on their watch, the numbers ended up being so completely implausible to even the most blinkered supporter. For example, the Office for National Statistics, which, by the way, if ever you want the real data, that's where you go to. That is totally independent and totally accurate. That indicated the true rate of unemployment being 3 times greater than the government were claiming. So when the government said that the unemployment rate was 4.5%, the actual percentage of working age people without a job was 21.5%. But hang on, I hear you cry. That's more than 3 times higher. Of course, not everyone without a job would need to be described as unemployed. They may be financially independent and not looking for a job, for example. So that is why the ONS was saying that the government's figures were actually 3 times too low and not 4.5 times too low. And here's where the lie is shown. So in the UK, there are about 5% of working age people who don't seek employment. It could be due to financial independence or staying at home to care for children or other family members, for example. In other words, these are people who are not wishing to enter the employment market. They don't need benefits. They don't need a job for income. Now, that is the point at which, if you have 5% unemployment, you've actually got full employment. That is the point at which everyone who wants a job has a job. So when the government tried to say that unemployment is below this figure, and yet we also know there are loads of people unable to find a job, we know it's a lie. Another obvious indicator that unemployment is actually very high in reality is the suppression of wages. So when unemployment really is low, employers have to offer competitive wages in order to attract and retain staff. It's a workers' market under those conditions. This is much more likely the more skilled the work, of course. But even in industries where workers need advanced skills, which are not that common, wages have remained very low. The two things just don't add up. So the government, even before Brexit reared its ugly head, was set on presiding over rising unemployment, but having the nerve to claim that not only was it going down, but at the lowest point in 2 generations. With Brexit, many also now have their beady eyes on removing the few employment rights that being a member of the EU has given us. This is why so many are refusing to sign up to a customs union. If we did as Labour want and tied ourselves to EU standards, then they'd be powerless to take those freedoms away. It's funny, isn't it, in a way, the ironies of Brexit, because some people voted leave, they say, for more freedom, but we'll have less. Some voted for less immigration, but we're having more. And some voted for better trade, but we're getting worse. I wonder if there's anything any of them did vote for that they'll actually get, I wonder. Anyway, now Theresa May has said that Parliament will get a vote on whether to remove worker rights after Brexit. Of course, the way she's phrased it is a vote on changes to worker rights. But given that I've not seen any proposals for any improvements on those rights, I don't think it takes a lot of working out what that means. The first one will be a chance to vote down new employment rights coming online in the EU in 2020. The Prime Minister also dressed this up with another facet, which says that Parliament will get a say on whether we should align ourselves with the EU rules, including worker rights. But as has been shown with Conservative opposition to a customs union, which would do the same thing in a legally binding way, you can't imagine that the current Parliament would ever sign up to it. And just by offering up on a case-by-case vote, it could be accepted by one government and then removed by another. We could literally now work our entire working life cycle between having employment rights and then not having employment rights, just depending on whether it was a Labour or Conservative government. There are already proposals to reduce rights on parental pay and flexible working, for example. And just as with the state of unemployment, the Prime Minister is also trying to deceive people by saying that actually you'll find the UK government exceeds EU standards on employment, so there's nothing to worry about. Really? By what measure is she saying that? Let's look at a few measures. Obviously, there are lots of different measures you can try and use to judge how good it is being a worker in a particular country. So we'll look at a few measures. So one of them is the Happiness Workers Index. You're going to be working for a good half a century of your life, we hope. So it's important to be happy in your job. Now, on the Happiness of Workers Index, the UK is in 32nd place in the world. So there are 31 countries where workers are happier in their working life. This is specifically about working than the UK. Now, bear this in mind. There are only actually 31 countries in the world that are even classed as first world countries. So at least one of those countries, without even checking, is not a first world country. How poor is that? Let's look at another measure. So in terms of whether what worker rights do exist are actually upheld. So in the latest International Trade Union Confederation report, the UK was rated a 3, which is defined as regular violation of worker rights. This is a worse category than almost every other EU nation. The only 2 in that same category are Spain and Poland, and there are none in a worse category. Everyone else is higher than us. And that includes, of course, the wealthiest ones of France and Germany, because I know some people say, oh, but when you're a very large economy, you can't really afford rights. France and Germany managed to. So we are not exceeding there either. So then let's have a look at some other rights. So parental leave. The average parental leave in the EU is 87 weeks. Nowhere near that for the UK. In fact, a comparison chart shows just how far we are behind other EU nations. So we're not exceeding there either. And when it comes to paid leave in general, all EU countries by law have to guarantee 4 weeks of paid leave. And I know Americans at this point are going to go in, luxury, absolute luxury. Yeah, okay, Americans have it much worse, but we're comparing with the EU here because our Prime Minister said that we exceed EU standards, but we haven't found one yet. So how do we shape up to those realities? So we have the minimum 20 days of paid leave plus 8 bank holidays. That's 28 days altogether. For a lot of workers, okay, the bank holidays don't always work for everyone. In fact, because of those violations of workers' rights, not even everyone gets their full 20 days of paid leave either. Now, that actually compares favourably with Germany. Germany also only have the bare minimum of 20 paid days. And they get an extra bank holiday, 9, but I'm not going to make a big fuss about one extra bank holiday. But it is less compared to France, which has 25 days minimum paid leave and 10 bank holidays. But when you look at the EU as a whole, our paid leave is still the bare minimum when half of EU countries have more in their own national laws. And no EU country has fewer bank holidays, with almost all of them having more. So we're not exceeding there either. So what about remuneration? Now, wages are always a tricky one. Okay, a country with a higher average wage may not actually be better paid, really, because if the cost of living is higher, it can sort of be eaten up with that. What really matters surely is the standard of living that those wages can afford you. But wages are the purpose of employment, so we might as well look at this as well. There is one nation in the EU that is wealthier than the UK, but there are 8 EU countries where the median average wage is higher. This includes both smaller economies such as Ireland, as well as the larger ones like Germany and France. So when it comes to distribution of wealth, we're pretty bad at that too. So again, I ask the question, by what measure is Theresa May saying that the UK government exceeds EU standards on employment law or rights or anything else? Because I have genuinely not found a single one. So although you can read at the moment no end of reports on what Theresa May is saying about workers' rights that will put you at your ease if you take her word for it or foolishly assume that the media will call her out, the reality is that she and her government have not only lied about the realities of employment right now, there is no reason, therefore, to believe that what she says about the future of employment rights will also be true. And that's my take on that. So I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe for further content, and click that bell notification. Until next time, I'll see you later.